The Ancient City, the biggest structure we've ever seen added to Minecraft, with its variety of strange rooms, new mobs and blocks, as well as the entire structure being in ruins. The Ancient City leaves us with some burning questions. Who created these cities? What happened to them? And are you subscribed yet? But in order to understand the present circumstances of the Ancient City, we first need to understand its past. And so we ask the question, what did the Ancient City originally look like? To start off with, the Ancient City wasn't originally underground. Instead, it would have been on the surface. Additionally, the ancient cities would have been in either a birch forest or a flower forest, because of the need the city had for all the honeycomb, for all the candles. And these are the only two biomes where beehives spawn. Secondly, the ancient city wouldn't have been in ruins. Instead, it would have been much more developed and more complete. And finally, and most importantly, the ancient city would have not been made with deep slate blocks. This is because, while advanced, the ancient civilization who built the ancient city would have no reason to build a city out of deep slate, as it's found very low in the ground, which makes it very hard to get to. Also, there are currently no mine entrances anywhere near the city, and as such, it's very likely that the ancient city didn't even try to mine down to the deep slate levels. Thus, we can infer that the ancient city would have been made using a completely different block palette, one that would be easier to obtain. Here's what I believe it was. Instead of deep slate bricks, they would have used stone bricks. Instead of deep slate tiles, they would have used normal bricks, and instead of grey wool, they would have used light blue wool. Now, while this may sound a little bit weird, the textures to all these blocks do match up with each other, and with the wool we know that the grey wool was once light blue wool because of the small traces of light blue wool that remains within the city. Also, when you account for the fact that the ancient cities are probably millions of years old, it is quite likely that some of the blocks would start to lose their colour and harden over time. And so, with all these things kept in mind, this is what the ancient city used to look like. But how does this help us answer the question, who created the city? Well, the answer to that question is actually hidden within the architecture of the ancient city. Let me explain. There are only two types of towers within the ancient city. This tall white type, made of bricks, and this smaller thinner type, made of dark oak. Now, this may look meaningless to you at the surface, but if you combine the structure of the first type and the block palette of the second type, what do you end up with? A pillager outpost. And in the entire city, bricks and stones are very common. But do you know who else used bricks and stones? Well, it's the villagers and the wool. That is a block that is only able to be harvested by the villagers, the illagers, or the player. And there is a lot of wool here. And so that's why I believe that both the illagers and the villagers created the ancient city together long ago. But that still doesn't explain what happened to the ancient cities, and what caused them to be where they are today. So here's what I believed happened to the ancient city. A very long time ago, the villagers and the illagers worked together and they built the ancient cities. The illagers were powerful beings and could gather all the raw materials needed to create the buildings. But they needed the help of the villagers, who were less powerful but much more technologically advanced. The villagers could convert these raw materials into the blocks they actually needed for the city. For example, the illagers could go out and collect clay and give it to the villagers, and they could smelt that clay into bricks, and together that's how they built the ancient cities. As time went on, these cities grew and grew, and until they became the largest structures in the entire game. However, at one point, some villagers were experimenting in secret underneath the central areas of the city when something went wrong. These villagers were experimenting with redstone and the LA, but once they'd given the LA some XP and fused it with some redstone, they had accidentally created the Skulk. And once the Skulk had been created, it was the beginning of the end. Immediately, the Skulk escaped on a search for XP, and at this point it was actively spreading, killing any of the illagers or villagers that it came across. And since they dropped XP, it allowed the Skulk to continue to grow very quickly. The Skulk even killed and corrupted the ancient city's ex-protector, the Warden, and the Skulk made the Warden turn against its old rulers, which forced both the illagers and the villagers to evacuate. The illagers escaped in one large group to the Dark Oak Forest, where they built the Woodland Mansion. Now, as the illagers were strong, they could build massive mansions, but as they lacked the intelligence that the villagers had, they could only build using simple materials, like cobblestone, planks, and logs. Meanwhile, the villagers spread out in the world in hundreds of different groups, creating hundreds of villages. And while they were all much smaller, they were also far more advanced, as they built mechanical protectors, metallic bells, and complex stones for their buildings. Furthermore, the illagers would capture any LAs that they could find to stop any future production of Skulk from the villagers and to stop them developing any new technology using the LA. However, the illagers wanted more revenge on the villagers for destroying their home. So they made thousands of pillager outposts, inspired from their towers from their old home across the land, which forced the villagers to stay sheltered in their villages. This illager and villager conflict would last indefinitely, as neither side could overcome the other, all while the ancient cities began to crumble and collapse, being consumed by the land around them. And after thousands of generations, the illagers and villagers slowly forget what they were fighting for, leaving us with the mystery of the ancient city.